So we're out here testing the new LS3 billet drive layout in the snow here. This has essentially the JK drive using our billet drive accessory brackets. Now this particular one has a billet drive air conditioner bracket, and the alternator and power steering are a combination of our earlier steel and aluminum brackets, which will be replaced with full billet, but this is essentially the drive, and I can tell you it's working awesome. This is a 15 Rubicon. This Rubicon has a 2.7 to 1 241J in it, and I've been talking to a lot of guys recently about transfer case ratios, and what you have to understand is this LS3 has over 400 foot-pounds of torque, and the 6L80 has a 4-to-1 low first gear ratio. So when you combine those two, if you go more than 3-to-1, you're going to have a hard time getting wheel speed up. Right now I'm in 4 low, and if I just touch the throttle, I'm spinning the tires. So to go to a 4 or 5-to-1 box really isn't required. We got 1-tons in this JK, and it is a Rubicon, has lockers, fortunately. So if you're going to get an Atlas for general crawling, get a 3-to-1. That would be my advice. If you're going to get a 241, we don't recommend the OR. The OR is a 4-to-1 box. We actually can support it, but the combination of the weak front planetary and the low ratio doesn't make it very desirable with a V8 with a 4-to-1 low. Now you're at a 16:1 low ratio, which is a little bit too steep for general trail running. As you can see, I'm running this trail in 4 low right now just fine. If I had a 5-to-1 box, I'd have a hard time getting wheel speed up. Now the nice thing about the Atlas is you can go into front wheel drive for snow, which you can't with the 241J. You can also go into 2-wheel drive low, which means you can engage the rear axle, lock your locker, and leave the front free. And that's great for going up switchback trails. Now I'm going to go back into, we're going to throw it in neutral. We are now in 2 high. We got to turn our lockers off. I really don't like the JK switch. There's a little ambiguity as to what's on and what's off. So we're going to rock the wheel a little, get that rear locker to go out. There we go. So getting back to the transfer cases, we like the 241J, and let's talk about that a second. The 241J is the stock transfer case in the non-Rubicon JKs. Has a 2.7 low ratio, is chain driven, uses ATF for fluid. Now, you might say, oh, I'd rather have a gear driven, gear lube transfer case, twin stick, and there absolutely is reasons to have that. The 241J will handle 450 to 500 horsepower using our large input. One of the weak points in the transfer case is the front planetary. When you go to a Rubicon 4-to-1, that leverage actually makes the front planetary weaker. So not only is it not required, but it's weaker. Part 2 is the 241J with our input is very strong. It will handle a 450 to 500 horsepower LS3. Being chain driven means it's perfectly quiet, and it has very low friction. Now in a normal JK, you don't have unlocking hubs. What that means is the front axle is driving the drive shaft all the time. So internally inside the transfer case, as you go around turns, the 2 shafts are running at different speeds. Now with a chain, it's very low friction. Clearances are not really that critical with a chain. They're very tolerant to misalignment. So there's an advantage there. We're running thinner oil So I have customers, let's say in Canada, Newfoundland, Alaska, and when you're running ATF, that lubricates the transfer case a lot better. In addition, the 241J has an internal oil pump, so it is forced oiling, it's not splash oiling. When you add all this together, you have a quiet, strong transfer case. Now you are limited to the factory modes, which means 4 high, 2 high, and 2 low, which works for most people. Now if you're going up a switchback trail in Arizona, like to Jerome, where it goes up to 8,000 feet over just a couple of miles, and you need 4 low, or you need low range, and you put it in 4 low, you're going to be fighting the wheel the whole way up that mountain with a 241J. With an Atlas, you can throw it into 2 low, free the steering up, and drive up the mountain. So there are some limitations. In addition, the way Jeep sets up the lockers, you have to be in 4 low to engage your lockers. Now there are times that I'd like to be in 2 low with the locker on, let's say in sand, but you don't have that option. You have to lock the rear first, then the front. You have to be in low range under 18 miles an hour. So there's a lot of inhibitors in the factory setup. Now, if we move over to an Atlas, you can get a 3-to-1, 3.8, 5-to-1 Atlas, and we've done them all. We've done the Atlas 4s, and I can just tell you that from a simplicity standpoint, stay with an Atlas 2. It's smaller. With the Atlas 4, it's more expensive. You have a front high-low section, which isn't as strong. Advance most likely will not warranty a Atlas 4 behind a V8. And there's no reason to put the Atlas 4 in to begin with. Unless you are going to do serious rock crawling, where you're going to have your Jeep on vertical slopes, where you absolutely have to have that ultra-low ratio, then don't get the Atlas 4. If you're just the average guy cruising trails, running up and down passes like this, just get the Atlas 2. The Atlas 4 front high-low section is really not up to a powerful V8. And the other part of the Atlas we need to talk about is it's gear driven. Being gear driven means it's running gear lube, a heavier oil. And heavier oils traditionally do not get into where they need to get into until they warm up. So if you're at negative 40 degrees like it is in Canada and you have gear lube, it's essentially almost a solid. And you have to take that into consideration. We want to warm that oil up before we do anything with it. If you don't have unlocking hubs and you're going around turns at high speed like I am right now, those 2 shafts are going to be rotating at different speeds. And what ends up happening is friction. Friction is heat. The Atlas, like the 241, is aluminum. The Atlas is splash oiled. Now they are releasing a oil pump for the Atlas soon, and from what Steve Roberts tells me at Advance, it's mainly for flat towing, but I think it'll also aid in highway travel, because if you're driving 80 miles an hour with a 500 horsepower V8 up the mountains of Colorado and going around these wide swooping turns, there's a lot of internal friction in that transfer case, especially with heavy gear oil. So the Atlas really was designed in an era where they were putting them behind 4-liter inline 6 TJ motors or 2.5 motors, and it's awesome for that. In today's modern world with 500 horsepower V8s, 7,000 pound JKs holding 75, 80 miles an hour for hours on end, the Atlas is a little bit of a dated design, but I will say I know what Atlas or Advance is doing, and they are going to make sure that the Atlases are up to the new V8s, and they've already incorporated a lot of the improvements. So I have no issues installing an Atlas even on a high horsepower V8.